Good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening. Whatever time it is where you're listening from. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. We're going to tackle chapter 10, The Lobster Quadrille. But before we do that, I got a couple of emails I wanted to share with you. The first one says, Jimmy, I don't understand the last chapter about the mock turtle. What does the mock turtle's education have to do with Alice's answering the question about who she's trying, that you tell us about, that is who she is? Well, that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that. One of the things that was true then, when this was written as it is now, is what you learn in school. And what you learn in school is really hardly ever applicable in real life. Well, some of it is, 2 and 2 are 4, etc. But this is a story about Alice, a young girl encountering creatures who, in an odd sort of way, teach her about real life. We're going to examine closely in the final analysis of Alice when we finish this book. But for now, what I'd like you to do is think about the turtle's education. The turtle tells us of what he learned and so on. And one of the things he learned was washing, right? And Alice makes a point about washing not being needed if you live on the bottom of the sea. But how important is washing in the real world, whether you're living on the bottom of the sea or not? Or do you think fish don't wash themselves in a certain way? Even when Jimmy was growing up, my mother used to say, did you wash your hands almost constantly? And look what happened, when COVID hit, right? There was a lot of soap and sanitizer sold during that event. But the other courses that the turtle talked about, such as the branches of arithmetic, like ambition, distraction, derision, or the Griffin's courses, who taught laughing and grief. These are real things. These are things we learn in real life, and they're not really taught in school. No one teaches you in school necessarily about real life. They try to do it, but that's one of the reasons you read classic books like this, because you learn how other people lead their lives. I have a saying that you could live to be 300 years old, but in classic, you'll never meet the amount of people you'll meet in classical literature. Never. You just won't do it. It's impossible. Not only that, like we're seeing in this case, the third person narrator can take us right into the head of a character like Alice and tell us what she's thinking. So Alice is really experiencing things, and she's going to remember the things that she learned. She ties the things from her experience to what she's experienced here, and the two often do not connect. And remember, when she first saw the turtle, she felt deep pity when she saw him. Why was that? Why did she feel deep pity? Who teaches us to feel deep pity in the schools? What did the deep pity turn into during this chapter? Thanks for that email. I got one more that said, Jimmy, how did Lewis Carroll think of all these things for his book? That's another good question, but I'm afraid Jimmy can't answer, and he won't answer that even if he did know the answer, because we're not really concerned about Lewis Carroll. We have to stay within the story and who's telling us the story, which is the third person narrator, who often helps us understand with his use of parentheses. I've pointed that out several times. I want you to remember that when you read classic works like this, and any other works that we're going to read together, we want to stay within the story. And now afterwards, you may read Lewis Carroll did this, or Lewis Carroll did that. And, who can say for sure if that's true or not? I can guarantee you that no one really knows. For example, if you Google, quote, what inspired Lewis Carroll to write Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, you're going to get a ton of answers. And one of them, I'm going to read this. I typed it out earlier. One of them is from the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica, certainly a well-respected source of truthful information. And that entry says the answer to the question of what inspired him was Lewis Carroll befriended Alice Liddell, the daughter of the dean of the Christ Church. Remember, Dodson was a minister, right? and a mathematician. According to Liddell, Carroll told her that her siblings fantastic stories and fairy tales. So Carroll used to tell her and her siblings fairy tales, including Alice's Adventures Underground, an earlier version of Alice's Adventures in the Wonderland. It is often supposed that Liddell herself inspired the character of Alice. The key word in the Encyclopedia Britannica's entry is supposed. No one really knows. And that's why I don't ever want you thinking about the author of the story. You have to think about the story itself. Afterwards, if you want, you can go do the research, read a lot of books, references. In fact, if you really want to learn something about Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll, read Carroll's letters and diaries, and you might gain a better understanding. But just suffice to say that this is much more than a children's book, much more. Okay, and with that, let's go on to Chapter 10, The Lobster Quadrille. What's a quadrille? It's a dance in the 18th and 19th century. You can Google it, and you can actually watch videos of people dancing the quadrille. But this chapter is titled The Lobster Quadrille. So the mock turtle sighed deeply and drew back one of the flapper across its eyes. He looked at Alice and tried to speak, but for a minute or two, sobs choked his voice. Same as if he had a bone in his throat, said the Gryphon, and set to work shaking him and punching him on the back. At last the mock turtle recovered, with tears running on his cheeks, and he went on. He says, you may not have lived much under the sea. Parentheses, I haven't, said Alice. And perhaps you were never introduced to a lobster. Alice began to say, I once tasted. Remember, Alice is very literal. She don't forget what her cat was doing to the mouse, right? But she checked herself hastily and said, no, never. So you have no idea what a delightful thing a lobster quadrille is. No, indeed. What sort of dance is it? Why, said the Gryphon, you first form into a line along the seashore. Now, I want you to try to imagine this when they're talking. 2 lines, cried the mock turtle. Seals, turtles, and salmon, and so on. And then when you've cleared all the jellyfish out of the way, we're going to continue with the analysis here because this is important. Top of page 106. That generally takes some time, interrupted the Gryphon. You advance twice, each with a lobster as a partner, cried the Gryphon. So it's not just the turtle talking, it's the Gryphon describing the lobster quadrille, right? So, and again, I would advise you to Google quadrille, look at how they dance, and then try to imagine what they're telling you here. So each has a lobster as a partner. Who has a lobster? The salmon, etc. Of course, the mock turtle said, advance twice and set to partners. Change lobsters and retire in the same order, continued the Gryphon. If you've ever seen a square dance, it's kind of like that. People are moving in unison. It's a planned thing. It's a structured dance. Then the mock turtle went on, you throw the hyphen. The lobsters, shouted the Gryphon with a bound in the air. As far as you into the sea as you can. And then you swim after them, screamed the Gryphon. He's screaming, he's shouting. Turn a somersault in the sea, cried the mock turtle, capering about. And they're change lobsters again, yelled the Gryphon at the top of his voice. Back to land again. And that's the first figure, the first round, right? Said the mock turtle, suddenly dropping his voice. And the 2 creatures who had been drumming around like mad all this time, they sat down very sadly and quietly. And they looked at Alice. Must be a very pretty dance, said Alice timidly. Would you like to see a little bit of it? Said the mock turtle. Very much indeed. Come, let's try the first figure, said the mock turtle to the Gryphon. We can do it without lobsters, Which shall sing? Oh, you sing, said the Gryphon. I forgot the words. So So they began solemnly dancing around and around, and Alice, every now and then, treading on her toes when they passed too close and waving their forepaws to mark the time. Don't forget what these critters look like, right? The griffin has claws, right? When the mock turtle sang very slowly and sadly. "Will you walk a little faster?" said the whiting to a snail. "There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance?" The fish originally known by the name of whiting. That's a fish. This whiting is a fish. I'm not going to read you this Latin stuff, but it's a fish. You can look it up. And I want to continue with the analysis because this is part of the song. "You could really have no notion how delightful it will be when they take us up and throw us out with the lobsters out to sea." But the snail replied, too far, and gave a look askance. Said he thanked the whiting kindly, but he would not join the dance. Would not, could not join the dance. Would not, could not join the dance. "What matters is how far we go," his scaly friend replied. Who's the scaly friend? Yes, the whiting. "The further off from England, the nearer is to France. There is another shore, you know, upon the other side. Then turn not pale, beloved snail, but come and join the dance." The snail doesn't want to dance. If you throw him out too far to sea, the snail can't get, if you know anything about snails. "Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance?" "Thank you. It's a very interesting dance to watch," said Alice, feeling very glad that it was over at last. "And I do like the curious thing about the whiting." Curious song. "Oh, as to the whiting," the mock turtle said, then you've seen them, of course." "Oh, yes," said Alice. "I've often seen them at," and din, and she stops. Din, she stops herself. You know what she was going to say, right? She checked herself hastily. "I don't know where din may be," said the mock turtle. "But if you've seen them so often, of course you know what they're like." "I believe so," Alice said thoughtfully. "They have their tails in their mouth, and they're all over crumbs." Think about what she's saying here. They have their tails in their mouths, and they're all over crumbs. That's how you serve whiting. "You're wrong about the crumbs," said the mock turtle. "Crumbs would wash off in the sea. But they have their tails in their mouths. That's for sure. And the reason is," and here the mock turtle yawned and shut his eyes. "Tell her the reason why and all that," he said to the griffin. Maybe he doesn't know. "The reason is," the griffin said, "that they would go with the lobsters to the dance. So they got thrown out to sea. So they had to fall along the way. And so they got their tails fast in their mouths. And so they couldn't get them out again. That's all." I think there's a little makeup, imagination going on here. "Thank you," said Alice. "It's very interesting. I never knew so much about a whiting before." "I can tell you more than that if you'd like," said the griffin. "Do you know why it's called a whiting?" "I never thought about it," said Alice. "Why?" "It does the boots and shoes," the griffin replied very solemnly. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. "Does the boots and shoes," she repeated, in a wondering tone. "Does the boots and shoes? What are your shoes done with?" said the griffin. "I mean, what makes them so shiny?" Alice looked down at them and considered before she gave her answer. In other words, she's not just saying what the griffin says. "Well, they're done with blacking, I believe." "Boots and shoes under the sea," the griffin went on in a deep voice, "are done with whiting. And now you know." And what are they made of? Alice asked in a tone of great curiosity. Well, soles and eels, of course, the Griffin replied rather impatiently. Any shrimp could have told you that. Well, if I had been a whiting, said Alice, whose thoughts were still running on the song, I'd have said to the porpoise, keep it back, please. I don't want you with us. We don't want you with us. Well, they're obliged to have the porpoise with them, the Mock Turtle said. No wise fish would go anywhere without a porpoise. Soles and eels, soles and heels. Look how close those are. And no one would go anywhere without a porpoise. 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 What the heck is going on in here? We're going to stop there. We're going to continue in the next analysis of what's going on. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Chapter 10, The Lobster Quadrille. I hope you enjoyed the dance and the singing and the emails. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Talk to you soon. Have a great day.